Today is it's the second Eccentric Viewing Conference that the Macular Disease Society has organised. The first was back in 2009, and really that was focused on promoting different approaches to eccentric viewing and different models. And really that event inspired the Macular Disease Society's programme around eccentric viewing, and also has informed the design of today's event. I think, as many of you know, the Macular Disease Society is the UK charity that is dedicated to supporting people with all forms of macular disease. And from our perspective, we believe that eccentric viewing and steady eye techniques should be an integrated part of the low vision and rehabilitation offer in the UK. And we're also really committed to trying to improve access for everyone affected by macular disease. And so I suppose today really is kind of part of that commitment. Since the conference in 2009, we've had some progress. We think things are improving and an interest in the technique is growing. We've established a professional network. We've got 700 people, 700 professionals signed up to that network. It provides different resources, helps us share best practice, and helps us report on emerging research. So if you're not signed up for our newsletter and part of that professionals network, I'd encourage you to just let us know, let the staff know today, and we'll make sure that you're signed up for that. We've also seen interest grow in eccentric viewing and steady eye techniques from a range of different professionals, from ophthalmic nurses, from ECLOs, and from a range of optometrists right across the different professions, who really want to know more, find out more information about the technique, and also be able to signpost more effectively. And we know that across the country there are some pockets of really, really excellent practice, and I think that you represent many of those today. However, you could probably sense there was a bit of a but coming. I still think that we've got an awful long way to go. I think whilst we have got some pockets of excellent practice, we know that provision, unfortunately, is still pretty patchy. We did a bit of mapping over the last 18 months, and we think we found about 50 providers of eccentric viewing and steady eye techniques around the country. You know, not 100% sure that we've necessarily got every one, but you can see that's not complete coverage by any stretch of the imagination. We know that access to skilled staff is really an issue. So whether you're accessing eccentric viewing via social services, via a local society, or a low vision therapist, it really depends on the depth of skills and understanding about eccentric viewing and steady eye that individual has, but also on their caseload and their workload, which in many cases is really, really high. We also know that for some professionals, they're limited in terms of their geographical coverage, so they can't necessarily see every patient that may come to them. And also, anecdotally, we hear that actually there's a bit of a lack of clarity, particularly amongst managers, I think, as to who's actually responsible for providing and delivering eccentric viewing. So I think that's something that we've got to consider. All of that, of course, I think is compounded by the financial situation that we find ourselves in. It's tricky out there as a charity, and I'm sure from your respective organisations you're also seeing the challenges. The Macular Disease Society has just done some research, and we know that the numbers of people with macular disease, and particularly age-related macular degeneration, are just growing. So we know that there are at least 500,000 people in the UK who have late-stage age-related macular degeneration. And we know that those numbers are going to triple by 2020. So that's a lot more people that are going to require support. So it's about 70,000 people diagnosed each year. 70,000 people. So that's a lot of people coming into the system. Cuts across all sorts of different services are making things more challenging. And we know that perhaps for private providers, there's kind of little incentive for them to get involved in providing the training. I think the other issue is that there's a lack of understanding about the value of the technique, particularly amongst funders, commissioners and managers. And we're doing quite a lot to try and build a robust evidence base to demonstrate the value. And we'll be talking about some of those different approaches, clinical and social measures, later on today. But we've got a lot of work to do to try and convince people of the value of the technique. And I think the other issue is that really we're not operating in an integrated system. The pathway to enter eccentric viewing, if you like, is not always clear. It's not always clear exactly when an individual would most benefit from eccentric viewing. And I think whilst we believe that eccentric viewing and steady eye is just one of the tools in the box, it's not always seen as part of an integrated offer. So we've got work to do to try and make it an integrated part of the offer. So today, what we're going to try and do is really kind of explore some of those issues and different challenges. We're going to be looking at a range of different models because we know that there are lots of different approaches to providing, measuring and delivering eccentric viewing and steady eye, and lots of different approaches to skills development. And so really the aim of today is to give you a flavour for the different approaches that are out there. And so hopefully you'll be able to take some of those different approaches and what you've learnt back and apply them in your particular setting, whether that's about delivering eccentric viewing and steady eye or actually perhaps signposting. So we hope you're really going to take some of what you've learnt today back. And we're really going to, I suppose, explore the sort of the when, the who, the where and the how. Have I got all those in the right order? So we're interested in exploring when eccentric viewing should best start. So is it important to start eccentric viewing training before the assessment for magnification and low vision aids, for example? Or should we be prescribing low vision aids first and thinking about eccentric viewing second? So we're interested in the when. We're also interested in who should be providing eccentric viewing. So is it a clinical procedure or is it a rehabilitation process? And is there one particular profession that might be better suited to providing the training? And we're also interested in what kind of skills might be best suited. So is it about clinical skills or people skills? A bit of both, probably. We're also really interested in where eccentric viewing and steady eye training should take place. So is it best delivered in a clinical setting or in a rehabilitation centre or in the home, for example? And what about thinking about as an individual or a group setting? So there's lots of questions about the where. And we're also really interested in how eccentric viewing and steady eye are delivered. So can we unpick the kind of core elements of the offer? Should we be striving for a minimum standard in the UK, or even going further and thinking about a gold standard? So we hope that today we can start to unpick some of the how. So I hope we've got a fairly full agenda and a lot to think about and a lot to learn. Before we start moving into exploring some of those issues, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Amanda Reeves. Amanda's going to sort of take us back to basics a little bit and explain a little bit about eccentric viewing and steady eye. And then we're very lucky to have Hugh Douglas, Mr. Hugh Douglas, with us here today, who's going to talk to us a little bit about how he's benefited personally from eccentric viewing, because I think it's always really important to bring it back to the person and how people benefit individually.
As most of you know, many people with central vision loss adopt eccentric viewing quite naturally, but they don't always find the optimum position, and it's not always instinctive, and they don't necessarily apply it to a range of tasks and a range of situations. So it's if the understanding of how they're being able to see a little bit better, if they look to above, below, or wherever their best position is, then it's more consciously applied to different tasks. And there's a whole range of tasks that it can actually be useful for. There's a lot of talk about eccentric viewing and steady eye being particularly used for reading, but eccentric viewing can be used for so many other daily activities, and it becomes a more conscious thing. And the training and encouragement actually can help it become a more automatic response. If Crystal had been here today, he would have explained to you that he himself uses several different positions for different tasks, and he talks about from cycling to using a computer to reading and different hobbies. He's identified a different position depending on the working distance and what he's actually doing. Whereas we just tend to think in the UK that there might be one position for distance and maybe one position for near. So if someone needs to eccentrically fixate, once they've identified that best point of vision, the best results for reading are achieved if it can be combined with steady eye technique, which I'll come back to in a moment and explain exactly what that actually is. But with training and practice, it's possible to develop or further refine these skills if the person's adopted it naturally to make it easier to perform daily activities. And say it's not just about reading although reading is often what a lot of the research and a lot of the papers concentrate on, but it can make it easier to get about, being more aware of hazards, being more aware of where the curb is on the road, being better able to see photographs or faces, including an individual's own face in the mirror. Personal appearance makes quite a bit of difference. Watching the television, if they're using their vision in an optimal way. Telling the time, and we hear time and time again of a renewed interest in hobbies and activities that perhaps an individual had actually given up. And we're going to hear a little bit about that today. Our thinking is eccentric viewing and steady eye strategies should be viewed as a tool in the box of low vision and rehabilitation. It's not standalone, it's not sort of an add-on luxury. It can enhance the interventions that you yourselves are working with these people, whether it be mobility, daily living. If they're using their vision more effectively and understand their vision, it can enhance and probably give enhanced value for money for the time and effort that you're doing with other work. These practical skills can never make up for the changes in vision due to macular disease, but they can be useful tools, and it can help to restore confidence in tackling everyday tasks and leading to improved self-confidence and self-worth, and most importantly, an improved understanding of their own vision. But also, it's not just about the skills themselves. Learning a new skill can be inspiring in itself. And also, doing something for yourself. Too often, it's about the consultant can't do anything more for me, the doctor can't do anything more for me. And there's a positive, proactive choice to actually take the effort to learn the skill and practice the skill, and they're doing for themselves to make the most and learn to adapt to low vision. So it's much, much wider than just the skills themselves and about reading. So eccentric viewing itself is about identifying the area of the retina that's as close to the fovea as possible to maintain the level of acuity, the detail. But that's not the position that a person might find naturally, perhaps looking at friends, watching the television, may not be the best position for other tasks. And the training helps people to identify where the clearest areas of their vision are, then understanding how they need to move that clear area over what they want to look at. So it's actually looking in the opposite direction. So I'm going to put my notes down for the minute. So if somebody is aware that they're looking at something and it's a bit misty, it's missing, or it's not working for them, but then they've identified that there's a clearer area to the top right, they need to move that clearer area over the damage. So they're actually moving it down into the left. So that's the bit that people get a bit confused about, where my clearer area is up there. But that physical moving it over what they want to be able to see, whether that be a face, an object, photograph, is what learning about eccentric viewing is about. But it's also about doing it consciously. Often people will say, well, sometimes I can see my friends better. But actually consciously knowing where to look, when to use it, whether it be telling the time, putting the light switch on, that takes a little bit of practice for it to be a more automatic skill. So there are a range of methods used to help people identify where those clearest areas are. That might be from using visual field analysis equipment to identify the damaged cells, or conversely, using a range of subjective questioning, asking the person to describe how they see their surroundings, and a range of charts, such as the Amsler grid and the 1 to 9, trying to pinpoint where the clearest areas are. And psychologically, that's actually more positive. Same as when we do visual acuities. It's better to actually start with something that you think the person will be able to see and work back to work out what their visual acuity is, rather than start at 6 metres and work in and they can't do it and work in and work in. If you're asking somebody to think about what does work rather than the area that doesn't work, that's positive, quite a positive step. And you're finding the clearest area and using the clearest area rather than identifying where the damage is. And you're just focusing on, oh, that bit doesn't work and that bit doesn't work. But both methods are used, but I think you can understand that the more positive approach might have better results. So, not everyone with central vision loss will need to eccentrically fixate. If the area of damage is still quite small, but perhaps they're maybe finding telephone numbers a problem, they're aware they keep missing numbers or they keep making mistakes, they may not need to eccentrically fixate yet. They may just need to use the steady eye skill on its own. And we've found through our work over the last few years, ring scotomas and multiple scotomas seem to be far more common than we'd actually expected, where there's that small area that's still working fairly close to the fovea, but there's pockets and areas and islands of damage around that, maybe as a closed-in ring or just as patches. And that bit in the middle is still really, really clear, even if it's tiny. But if they do try to eccentrically fixate, they're going to reduce the level of detail and they're going to just reject it. They're not ready for it yet. But they're the people that you magnify as you go stronger and stronger and stronger. They actually don't need magnification, or if they need magnification, it's very low with good lighting, because you're trying to make the best of that very small clear window in the middle. Often, that little clear window in the middle may close up later. But often, if somebody's at least understood what eccentric viewing is, and they've learnt about steady eye, they might use the steady eye first and come back to eccentric viewing later if that clear area closes in. So telling somebody about eccentric viewing, even if they don't need it, can also be reassuring. And we've had a lot of people come to us actually that it's far too early for them, still got good vision in one eye, but that peace of mind that knowing their bad eye is actually quite useful and there's good vision there, gives them something to, yes, okay, if my other eye does become affected, I can use that. So some people just have a single session just to try and understand what eccentric viewing in steady eye is about. But they don't need eccentric viewing yet. Sometimes they just need steady eye. But if somebody does benefit by eccentric viewing, for reading, it's beneficial to learn about the steady eye. But the steady eye is actually the hardest part. It takes a bit of practice. The eccentric fixation, people pick up fairly quickly, and even if they're over time, which often happens, the position they need changes because the damage has changed, so they need to find a different clear bit. They adapt to a new position pretty easily. But the steady eye is the bit that takes a bit of practice, and it's the bit that can make the most difference to fluency and accuracy of reading. But the person needs to persevere and they need to practice. So, for example, now I've got my imaginary clipboard here. If they've identified that their clearest area, I'll use the same as before, above and to the right, they would get the first letter of the word that they're trying to read clear by looking above and to the right. Then they keep your head still and your eyes still. And if you can imagine, I've got a tube from my macula to from my clear bit of vision to that first letter. What you're doing is you move the object through the clear window, a bit like a typewriter. So that's what steady eye is just moving it through. And if somebody's using a CCTV, they would find the position on the screen that's clearest, and then the table actually does the steady eye for them because it's moving it through that clear window. So that's all steady eye is. The reason it's hard to learn and practice is when we were 4, we've gradually developed an automatic reading movement, saccadic eye movement. When the macula's damaged, that breaks down. So when we were 4, we had this steady loop movement across. Obviously, this is very exaggerated. We don't see a whole line at a time. We don't see a whole word at a time. The eye moves in this smooth loop. Macula's damaged. The brain still tries to do it. But we've actually found using equipment that the eye itself is doing more of a scribble, a zigzag. It's still trying to do that movement. And that's why when people say, oh, I get it, and it comes and goes, the steady eye bit, you're breaking that habit of a lifetime. you're breaking that habit of the eye moving. And that's where it's little and often, lots of practice, but they do a little bit, consciously thinking, right, head still, eye still, move the text. And that will then, if they persevere and they get it, will help them read more fluently, more accurately, because they're not having this jumping around, get a bit, lose a bit, get a bit, lose a bit. Does that sort of make sense? I know for most of you this is really back to basics for you, so I apologise if it is really basic. Eccentric viewing steady eye skills doesn't replace the need to use magnifiers and good lighting. But often, if somebody's using the vision they have more effectively, they may need less magnification because they're using their vision better, so they can then have a larger magnifier. It's easier for them to learn to use. Good lighting makes a big difference as well. Now, when we talk about eccentric viewing steady eye training, it's not a failure if that person actually doesn't end up using eccentric viewing. For some people, for a lot of the people we find, actually, they've just missed out on good lighting advice and understanding how that lighting can blast through the misty bits, the patchy bits, or using their vision more effectively, or understanding their vision. So not everybody who wants to be trained will necessarily end up using eccentric viewing in steady eye, but they do understand their vision and they may well come back to it later on. So it's not a failure if somebody doesn't leave a session saying, right, I don't want to do that. It's about understanding their vision and using their vision they've got it more effectively.
So I'm going to hand over to Mr. Hugh Douglas. Hugh, as I've been told to call him this morning. And Hugh has benefited from training as part of our revision, community-based eccentric viewing. And he's going to talk to us a little bit about his personal experience. So thank you, Hugh.
Thank you. Thanks. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. You see, I can't see, so you've got to speak up so that I can hear you. I was diagnosed as having macular degeneration in July the 26th, 2006. And it was quite a blow. Having enjoyed very good eyesight till then, I was on holiday, and suddenly on the beach I couldn't read my book anymore. So I thought, oh, it's too bright, it's too sunny today. So I'll read the book when I get back to the villa. Unfortunately, when I got back to the villa, I still couldn't read the book. So I knew there was a problem. Fortunately, I was flying home 2 days later, so I rang my optician the next day, and she made an appointment for me, and I saw her. And she referred me to the Royal Wolverhampton Eye Hospital via my doctor, I hasten to add. And it's there I went to see them, and they diagnosed that I'd got macular degeneration. In my right eye, I had got occult wet macula, and in my left eye, classic wet macula. A week later, I went back to the hospital and was given the laser treatment to my left eye. I was due to return 3 months later for the second treatment, which was quite the normal procedure. But I was aware that during that time my eyesight had deteriorated, so I went back earlier and was told that the laser treatment had failed, and if anything it probably caused quite a bit of scarring. So consequently I had my first injection of Lucentis at the Nuffield Hospital in Wolverhampton on the 1st of December in 2008 at the Regency Hospital in Macclesfield. I have to look it up. I had intraocular lens fitted to both eyes by Mr. Brendan Moriarty, who you may have heard of, who is a specialist in that field. It was felt not only by him but by Mr. Yang, who'd been looking after me at Wolverhampton, that it was quite safe to have that operation, although there was always a risk of the macula returning. Sadly, that's exactly what happened. 3 months later, in March 2000, March 2008, March 2009, it returned. And so consequently then I had to go back to the hospital, and I then went to the Leighton Hospital in Crewe, to the eye clinic there, and that's where I've been going ever since. And I've now had 35 visits during that period of time. In November 2009, I joined the Macular Disease Society group in Stoke-on-Trent, where I live. And I attend the monthly meetings there. Very interesting, invigorating meetings. We have interesting speakers, and it's a very good attendance group between 25 and 40 people of various ages, mainly older. I'm old, but they're older than me even, attend that on a regular basis. And it was there I learned about the techniques of erratic viewing and steady eye. And as a result of that, in July, August and September of 2010, one of the we have 3 trainers in our group, we're very lucky, all trained to do this eccentric viewing training. One of them, Sue Addis, who was brilliant, came to my home and trained me how to use erratic viewing techniques and steady eye. The sessions lasted between 1.5 and 2 hours, sometimes a bit longer with coffee, etc., each time. But it did make a vast difference to me. It's not easy to learn eccentric viewing and steady eye. In fact, it's quite difficult. One needs to concentrate a great deal, and sometimes that's difficult for me to concentrate. But you have to concentrate, and that's what I did during the training sessions with Sue. And also plenty of ongoing practice afterwards when you're alone or when you're thinking about what she's tried to convey to you. Amanda mentioned about the strong point of your eye. My strong point, I suppose, looking at a clock, was number 10. And when I used to look, Sue used to say, look at the face and tell me what you see. And I won't tell you what I said, but she found it amusing. But certainly if I looked at her, at her left, to the left of her face, that was the strong point. And I learned then to convey that further down to another area over to the right. And by learning that, it made me able to do things much better and much easier. In terms of reading, it's not terribly successful for me. I mean, I still can read, but with a magnifier. But it did help me with other things. And mainly, being quite vain, the very fact that I could now shave, it was no longer a hazard or a nightmare. I could do that much easier, whereas always before, I hope I haven't cut myself this morning, when I was shaving, I didn't very cut myself in this sort of business. But by learning these sessions, it has made a vast difference to me. Also, I live alone, so looking after myself and just general living, everyday living, going in and out of the home, cooking and ironing and gardening, there has definitely been a steady improvement there since I learned about eccentric viewing. You might like to know that there is another lady in the North Staffs group who also learned eccentric viewing by Sue, and she now applies lipstick to her lips and not to her chin. You may laugh, but you ladies know how important that is. But it just shows that if you can really concentrate and work hard, you can improve your everyday living. And that certainly has helped her, and it certainly helped me. I really do recommend to you today, and I haven't been briefed by anybody, these are my own thoughts and requests really. I recommend the technique of eccentric viewing steady eye is actually conveyed to as many people as possible. Without a doubt, it's improved my life and my sight, and also it has given me greater confidence. For example, I wouldn't be standing talking to you today unless I had that confidence. But thank you very much.